thank you all so much. It's really terrific to be here. Thank you, Marissa, and what a great opportunity. And I was especially honored when I realized that you only meet 4 times a year and you just have one presentation, so that really means a lot. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry Jim Potofsky isn't here because he does go back quite far in this as well in terms of a kind of a thought leader and conceptual supporter of this idea. Barbara mentioned that Mark Tucker, we're working with a national organization called the National Center on Education and the Economy, and Arizona, in fact, is one of a number of states rolling out this type of initiative, although I will say that Arizona is far ahead of the other states in the consortium. But many years ago, I lose track of exactly how many, Jim helped host a number of organizations here at Arizona Community Foundation to talk about some of these ideas, and out of that grew our Move On When Ready initiative. But our principal partner and supporter and has been the Helios Education Foundation, and really without Helios there would be no Move On When Ready in Arizona. We might be able to talk about it, but we really wouldn't be able to do it. So thank you, Barbara, and to the Helios Foundation for that. Just really briefly, I want to talk about our center, because I know most of you here, but not everyone. We are a nonprofit 501c3. Laddie Kaur, the former president of ASU, and I got the center started 10 years ago. We call ourselves a do tank, which means that we're not really strictly speaking a think tank, because the philosophy is think tanks are fantastic, they do great work, but unfortunately sometimes a lot of the work that they do is not taken to the next step. So we kind of see ourselves with a foot in both worlds, a foot in the think tank world and then a foot in let's see how we can make some of these ideas come to fruition. So that's where we get that phraseology about who we are. Before getting into Move On When Ready, and of course we want to talk about that, I just want to give a little bit of context, because Move On When Ready, as it turns out, is a very, very different approach to education, fundamentally different approach. And it's going to be easy to say the words, but it's going to be harder in some ways to get yourself in the frame of mind. But I just want to just set a really brief context. I know you're all very sophisticated about educational matters, but just to kind of help you think about it the way we kind of approached it. When Laddie and I got the center started, it was just the two of us, and now we have expanded. But we were, 10 years ago, really the big issue on the education agenda was high school dropout, among other things, but that was one of the main, and we started looking into high school dropout rates and trying to understand it. So somewhere along the line, I started looking at historical data, and I went back some decades. And how many of you know kind of what the high school graduation rates are today? What rough numbers? 75%. Yeah, so 72, 73. We're kind of at the national average, in fact. What do you think it was, say, 1970?
60.
It was virtually exactly the same. Now, I found that stunning, because I thought, gosh, with all the churn, all the reforms, all the initiatives, the standards, the high-stakes testing, you name it, we had not budged the needle. Now, there's certainly extenuating circumstances you could use to explain it, but that kind of got my attention. I mean, what are we talking about? I guess now it's 50 years. Is that right? 40, whatever. So that was really stunning to me. And so that's part of kind of the way we look at this, which is if all of these efforts haven't changed, what is it that we are not doing right? And I think my working theory is, and we've all heard it before, but I think the numbers really tell you, is we are using the exact same model of education, and I'm focusing on high school today because that's really what our initiative is geared toward. It's the exact same model. It's the industrial model, one size fits all, teacher in front of the classroom, all students kind of move lockstep, whether they're learning or not, you more or less, or we do more punitive things and say, you're not going to advance a grade because you're not up to par. So I think people recognize that concept that we've got this industrial model, but it's kind of hard to imagine what we might do differently because we've done it for so long.
Sybil, can I ask a question? I'm sorry, but you're saying that we're very sophisticated, maybe not so much. when you talk about, to me, I have a question about these rates. So when you say 75%, I think it's graduation rate, right? So these are kids that might not necessarily have dropped out. They're there and they get to their senior year, but they don't get a diploma because they're not.
Well, I was speaking about dropouts and then graduation rate.
So that,
there's
I need the
around.
difference. What's the difference?
Well, graduation rate means how many. If you start with 100 kids, how many actually graduate from high school? So the others don't get a diploma. The others are dropouts, don't meet the expectations, or don't finish school. They're just gone.
But is there a distinction between those kids that are still there their senior year and don't graduate because they don't test to get a diploma?
They would not be considered graduates.
Exactly, but are they considered dropouts? Because they don't really drop
Oh,
out.
well, now that's an interesting question. I've never been asked.
I know, but that's.
They probably are counted as dropouts, right?
If they don't stay on, yeah.
Right, because you can go to a 5th year of high school. I think you can go up to a 6th year. I think in Arizona, the state will support a student up to age 22 in high school, something like that.
Okay.
So, but I've never been asked that question. I hadn't quite thought about it that way. Well, anyway, as somebody famous said, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and think you're going to get a different outcome, which is kind of where we are at. There are also some really interesting trends that I don't have numbers for off the top of my head. But so on the one hand, graduation rates have stayed the same, and at the same time, we have, I call it kids talking with their feet, or telling us that the system's not working for them. So for example, there's a big trend now in kids taking college level courses in high school while they're still there. And as we know, a lot of kids drop out of school also not because they're not academically prepared. So you've got kids dropping out, you've got kids taking college level courses, and then on top of it, we've got kids graduating from high school who are not ready for college. So the statistics are, even if you have a diploma in hand, over 50% of students need remedial coursework in college. So, I mean, if you look at all those numbers, there's something that we're not doing right. And that's really kind of where we come in relative to Move On When Ready. I'm not going to review all the statistics about how important it is to, get not only a high school diploma, but to be college ready and actually attend at least some college in order to succeed. Just as an aside, in addition to all the other issues that I mentioned about high school, high school has not been designed to prepare kids for the next step. That hasn't been its purpose historically. Now it's kind of shocking to all of us because we all went to college, but it's actually not designed to prepare kids for college. So just as an example, a few years ago, there was a big debate within the education community in Arizona about how many years of math are required to graduate from high school. The minimum number of math courses required to graduate from high school did not correspond to the number of math courses you might need to go to a university like ASU. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to go into the big debate over math today, but it's just, we have not thought of high school necessarily as preparation for college, even though I think in all our minds we may kind of subconsciously think that. Now we do have a national discussion about that. We've got Common Core, we've got the acceptance, I think, that we need to prepare kids for college, but we don't yet have a system to do that. So Move On When Ready really is designed to address a number of things. One is it's designed to move away from a one-size-fits-all education for students. It's designed to prepare kids to be college ready by the time they graduate from high school, and it's designed to personalize education for students. Basically, Move On When Ready is a new, what we call performance-based high school education model designed to personalize the educational experience for students and prepare students to be college ready. To graduate from high school today in Arizona, and frankly anywhere in the country, you need to do several things. One is you need to pass all your courses. You might pass with a C-, which doesn't mean you've actually learned what you need to do to be prepared for college. So you need to pass your courses, and you need to pass the Ames test at a 10th grade level. That's the way the system is designed. So big surprise, as my friend Rich Crandall, who helped us get this legislation passed in Arizona, said, the bad news is that most kids actually do pass Ames. We tend to worry about the kids who don't pass, and of course we should, but but the kids who are passing Ames, it doesn't actually mean anything. So we are looking to prepare kids for college and really fundamentally make a significant change in the way high school is designed. What we're saying is that rather than seat time, which is really what is required to graduate from high school today, that students, that we set the bar, we set the performance level, and then we say, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get there. That we are committed to these students learning at a college-ready level, no matter how long it takes. So in other words, we're not going to just move kids along and say, you got your C- in that class, okay, you're done with that, you passed, and now you're going to do your next class. So fundamentally what it does is it says we have to clearly identify what students need to know. So we have a very precise way of defining what it is that they need to know. We actually have a delivery system to deliver this college-ready curriculum to them, and the Cambridge University board exam system was mentioned. These are, by the way, aligned to the Common Core because we get that question all the time. And we have a system that is designed to be adaptive to individual student interests and needs. Now, another thing I wanted to mention is that the definition that we have of college-ready level is one that we believe is attainable by all students, but not, and is rigorous, but is not set so high, that it doesn't set the bar so high that it knocks kids out of the block. So it's really a phased system. We're saying to be college-ready means you have the fundamentals or foundational college readiness that will allow you to enter an open admissions college, like a community college, without having to take remedial coursework. Now, if you remember the statistic I told you that over 50% of students need to take remedial coursework in math and English, just doing that would be huge. And it turns out that that bar is rigorous. It's actually more rigorous than most of our kids are doing now. But at the same time, it doesn't say, you know, you have to be doing math at a math major level or physics to become a physics major. So we're saying all students should be able to reach that level, and all students can reach that level if we give them the proper support to do that. Once they reach that foundational level, this goes back to what Barbara was mentioning, we're saying you can do that in 2 years. You can take 4 years if you need it. Now that's easier said than done, and Amanda's going to talk for a few minutes about how our schools are grappling with this, because it's to move away from this industrial model where everyone kind of moves along in a block and then somehow open it up and figure out how you deal with all individual student needs is very tricky. But that's really the fundamental vision that we have. When students reach that foundational level, we're saying, yes, you can graduate if you want to. But if you happen to finish that level or achieve that level before you reach the end of your senior year, let's say you finish at the end of 10th grade, yes, in theory you can graduate. We don't think too many kids are going to want to, especially ones who are that high academically achieving, they're probably going to want to deepen their academics. Then you have a lot more choices in the next 2 years of high school. So we're saying that choices that we're opening up for those students include, yes, going to community college straight from high school, or they can take more advanced coursework like AP and other types of courses that prepare them to apply and enroll in selective universities. We also have a third pathway for that, what we call upper division junior and senior year, that would be full-time career technical education. The reality is right now we have not developed that pathway because it's very complex. So this is really in diagram form what I was just talking about. I don't know, how well can you see? You can see okay? So this foundational level here is represented on the left. In the idealized model, if you don't mind my using that, because again, this is not time-based, but in the idealized model, a very prepared student going into college who worked really hard could potentially achieve that at the end of the 10th grade, could get to this level. So they could go on to community college, but, and it's a bit hard to represent this visually, they could also just not go to community college, but go into an upper division in high school, this full-time career technical education, or even do dual enrollment while still in high school. So the objective really is, how do we commit to students? The whole design of the system has to be focused on how do we commit to students that they can attain this college-ready level by the time they graduate from high school. I mentioned that we're partnered with the National Center on Education and the Economy, and that the providers are actually, the providers are kind of vetted, I was looking for that, vetted by this organization that helps us identify these very high quality instructional offerings. The instructional offerings, the best way I can describe them is, if you're familiar with AP, which I'm sure you are, imagine AP type courses, teacher professional development, curriculum guidance, very high quality assessments, and then imagine a course like that designed to meet the needs of 9th graders and 10th graders in all your subjects.
Mm.
So we have English, math, history, science, the arts, you name it, all the core requirements that a student needs to graduate from high school. We have that type of course, like an AP, but geared to that student's level. And that's the kind of courses that we're bringing to these schools. The teachers are very excited to teach this. The assessments, I just cannot emphasize enough how different they are than standardized tests. These assessments are evaluating students' critical thinking, writing abilities, problem solving. So they, again, also look more like, I'm sorry to use the AP example, but I think most of us are familiar with that. AP is for the advanced upper division. I think I'm going to ask Amanda to probably quickly go through, because we're about 20 minutes into this, I guess, but some of the details of the schools we're in, et cetera. Amanda has been amazing working with, I can't believe you haven't cloned yourself, because we've expanded very quickly. I should have mentioned that the legislation that I referred to was passed in 2010. We worked closely with Senator Crandall, who was then Representative Crandall, as well as Huppenthal, when he was in the legislature, was supportive and continues to support. The legislation, what the legislation did was, it said, this is a new pathway to high school graduation. And the bottom line is that we effectively eliminated Carnegie units as the requirement for graduating from high school. How many of you are familiar with Carnegie units? Oh, okay. Carnegie units, when I mentioned seat time is a requirement to graduate from high school, Carnegie units is how that seat time is effectively counted. So if you need 4 years of math, you need 4 Carnegie units of math, essentially, to graduate from high school. But as I mentioned, that doesn't mean that you actually know the math. It means you've been through the course. So that's what is meant by the use of the term seat time. It's like, how many hours have you sat in your seat? And if you sit in your seat long enough and you pass the course, then you get the credit. And that's not really been working. So what the legislation said was, it basically enabled this performance-based diploma for students, which said that if you can reach this level, then you can qualify for the diploma. It doesn't matter how long you've been in your seat. And students are going to really like that, because basically it says if you work really hard, you don't have to be quote-unquote stuck for 4 years no matter what you do. You can actually affect your own destiny, so to speak. You look really confused.
No, I'm with you.
Okay. As I said, it's a really, really different model. And anyway, I'll just pass it over to Amanda.
So, as Sybil shared, we are working with 30 schools now across Arizona, and just handed to you as a map that shows visually where the schools are that we're working with. And we're all okay, we're all okay. All right, so what I'd like to do is just share a little bit about the schools that we're working with and what we're actually seeing as they're making this huge commitment to college and career readiness for their students and rethinking about the design of the education system that they're offering in their high schools. So we are working with 30 schools, and one thing that's particularly interesting and exciting to us is the diversity of the schools with whom we're working. So we're working with district schools, we're working with charter schools, we're also working actually with a couple private schools that they too wanted to emulate this approach. 25 of the schools have selected a curriculum system that Sybil described called Cambridge International Examinations. Very high quality. While it might be somewhat new to us in the K-12 world, it's actually used in over 160 countries and is used in a number of states in the United United States as well. Another option that some of our schools are using is ACT Quality Core, developed by the ACT company that we might be familiar with, but it actually is an aligned instructional system. So the teacher professional development, a very well-defined syllabus, and an assessment at the end that actually assesses what the student was taught in that individual course. And really, this is a new trend that we have, and that we have middle schools that are also coming on board and saying, you know what, we realize that we need to prepare our students, and this is a pipeline strategy. So a number of schools have adopted Cambridge International exams at the middle school level, and we actually have other schools that have contacted us as recently as this week saying that they too would like to look at that. So you have the map here. You can see that we really do have a pretty broad reach in Arizona, and we're in the second year of working with schools. So schools that are in blue are schools that started with us in the 2011-2012 academic year, so they had grade 9 students last year. And schools in the red, 18 schools joined us this academic year and are starting with their grade 9 students as well. So in terms of student impact, we have a little over 10,000 students across those 30 schools that are in these Cambridge or ACT Quality Core courses. And again, it's not just math and English, it's history, it's biology, it's chemistry, it's fine arts. In terms of the diversity of the students that we're serving, just a little over half of those students qualify under the federal free and reduced lunch program. And our 2011 partner schools assess their students for the first time at the end of the last academic year. So we had just under 2,000 students that took these end of course exams for the very first time. We had some really powerful stories of how seriously these students took these exams, students that dressed up in suits and ties on their own, not encouraged to do so, but really took this seriously, and many of these students actually volunteered to take these assessments. And I did want to share just a little bit about what we're actually learning and seeing with these schools. So one is that they're really focused on supporting their teachers to be able to implement this curriculum with fidelity. With the support of Helios Education Foundation, our center led an 18-month planning process with Yuma Union High School District in preparation for their district-wide implementation of this approach. And working with the teachers, a lot of them said, veteran teachers that had been successful had said, I feel like I'm a first-year teacher again. This is really very different. In the same breath, also saying this is what I thought I was going to be doing as a teacher. So biology teachers teaching labs, students coming up with questions that they want to test in a lab environment versus, unfortunately, what often happens, a teacher standing in front and doing the lab for the students and the students just watching. So really a different change for these teachers. Second is that schools are creating collaborative environments to bring teachers together, to bring counselors together, to bring administrators together, to talk about what does implementation look like in their school and what do they need to be more effective. So again, using Yuma as an example, one of the things that came out of the work last year is that they developed something called their teacher collaborative days, where they're bringing their teachers by content area at least 4 times a year just to talk about curriculum and instruction. Which sounds like that might not be unique, but it actually is. So it's building shared understanding and really increasing their capacity at a very fast rate to be a more effective instructor. Schools understand that this is about saying all of our kids, we really believe, can reach this high bar of academic readiness that would prepare them for college or career, but it's going to take kids different amount of time to reach that level. So kind of a mantra that our schools now have is that time is the variable. And when you really think about that, that is a big shift for our schools, and that time, the schedules roll in school. When they create those master schedules, it really becomes very restrictive in many ways in terms of when can a student learn certain things, when can they be supported. So our schools really are thinking about this in new ways. And they're experimenting with different types of student support models. So they're thinking, how could we use lunchtime differently? We have schools that have created something called a lunch and learn lab, where it's not just tutoring, but students are coming in and their teachers have identified what is it exactly that you have not yet mastered, and how can we use this time to ensure that you do. So it's very specific and very strategic. Our schools are thinking about the master schedule differently. Again, in Yuma, we had a session where Tony Bedone, the superintendent, said to the guidance counselors and to the principals, bring your master schedules. They were hot off the press. I don't even think the ink was dry on some of them. They brought them in, and we went outside and literally burned them in a barrel. Hopefully we weren't breaking any rules. It was under the advice of the superintendent, so I think we're okay. Just to say that if we're really committed to this outcome for kids, we have to look at what we've been doing differently. And so that is difficult work. We don't have it all figured out, but we have schools trying to do that, and we're assisting them in that. And then finally, in order to really make this system work, you have to be able to use student-level academic data to be able to identify what have kids learned, what have they not, and what actions are we going to take. And again, that's very easy to say, much more difficult to do in practice, and is an area where I think our schools need some continued support, and we're working on that. And then before I turn it back over to Sybil, Barbara had shared at the beginning that we have created something called the Education Innovation Collaborative. And what we have created for our Move On When Ready schools is our Learning Collaborative. And what this really is a network of all of the schools across the state that have committed to this model. And it's the way in which we're intentionally working with them to improve and enhance effective implementation. And what we have found is that by bringing these schools together, that we think it helps accelerate not only at the rate at which they were able to adopt Move On When Ready, but to be able to implement with fidelity. So this is about intentional communication, intentional knowledge sharing, and intentional collaboration. So a specific example would be, I've mentioned that we're finding that schools are struggling in some ways in terms of how do you take that data and then take action based on that. We had a collaborative meeting in August where we talked about, okay, now that we have those end of course exam results, what are you seeing in the data, and what are you doing in those student intervention blocks that might be a little bit different than what you've done in the past. So we have other types of topics that we identify based on school need, but also as the organization working with them that we think are the most critical thing to pay attention to at any given time. So that's a little bit about what we're seeing, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. You know, I wanted to pick up on what Barbara had said, because I don't know if I articulated it quite as clearly as she did. We really believe that while this is a very rigorous program, it's been designed so that it should be accessible to all students so that they can succeed to be raised to a college-ready level. So we advocate for what we call a whole school model, which means this is not an elite program, this is not a school within a school, this is not a pilot. So we are very committed to the whole school model. We cannot require the schools to do that by law. The legislation does require that all schools that want to implement this come through our center, but we're really pleased that most of our schools have chosen to do whole school. Whole school really, to be more precise, has two parts to it. One is the curriculum and the teacher professional development for the whole school. To be truly whole school, we'd have to have all the students take the assessments, and I don't think I highlighted the assessments quite enough either, because the way we determine if a student is college ready is can they perform on what is determined to be a college ready level on these assessments. Unless you think this is teaching to a test, these are, as I mentioned, these are not multiple choice, fill in the blank. These are more like AP tests. So if you imagine an AP type test in all the courses for kids in 9th and 10th grade, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. And we had a very rigorous process, which I won't go into great detail about, but we have a very rigorous process for determining what college ready level means on those assessments. And in case anyone thinks this is rushing kids through high school, I can tell you that we have the results from the first assessments that were given last spring, and we have work to do. The kids were just in this program for 1 year, and so we're not surprised, but trust me, not all kids are hitting the marks right now. And so the real challenge for the schools now is to figure out the true meaning of allowing kids the time to learn what they need to learn, because we're not just shuffling them on. Yes, they advance by grade. We're not worried about having to hold kids back or anything. That's not the approach here. But so they're in the 10th grade, but they're going to have to supplement work that they were not able to master in the math that they took the previous year. They're going to have to keep working at that until they reach that college-ready benchmark. So that's what I mean by this looks very different, and this is really the first year that the schools are struggling with, as Amanda mentioned. How do they use time during the day? How do they use Saturday morning classes, summer school, you name it, to try to get these kids to help them move along. But the main point is that this is the college ready bar is set at a level that is foundational college readiness, so that all students should be able to reach that, and we're committed to that. If you look at the list of schools, it's actually quite interesting, because the flip side of the chart has the actual names. It might leap out at you that we've got all the basis schools. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the basis charter schools, but they've been ranked among the top academic achieving schools in the country now. All of their schools are doing this. Now, instead of offering the curriculum 9th and 10th grade, they're doing what, 8th and 9th, or 7th and 8th? So their kids are starting even earlier. But we also have schools that are in remediation. So there's something very attractive to schools about this. And part of what I believe it is that we're finally telling schools and teachers who are hungry for information, what does true academic achievement look like? What does college readiness look like? When you tell a teacher, teach to it so that your kids pass the 10th grade test, they're going to deliver that. And they've actually delivered it pretty well, as Senator Cranwell says. Most of the kids are passing this test. But we had a fantastic anecdote that Amanda shared with me recently when teachers were saying, I never thought of giving my students this level of work. I didn't even realize they could do it. And it was just, And so I think everyone is hungry for what does college ready mean? We actually have it, and teachers like to teach it. So anyway, I think that kind of covers the little spots that I thought we missed. Is there something?
No, we haven't. Okay. So I just talked a little bit about the work ahead, but I think that we've already touched on a lot of it.
So do you supply any extra teachers or staff to accomplish this?
Well, the schools, not particularly. I know in Yuma with the Helios partnership, they've been able to hire some additional staff. I don't think teachers so much, but it's about supporting the teachers in teaching in a different way.
Yeah.
And so it's.
But it seems like a lot more individualized, care, which means more people, doesn't it?
Well, it depends on how you organize it. So there's a couple of thoughts I have about that. First of all, we don't have perfected yet the individualized piece, because you're right. It's, there's different ways you could do it. For example, during a lunch and learn lab, you could have all the kids who want to work on math, whether they want to get ahead or catch up or whatever. You could have, let's say, 3 or 4 of the math teachers in the room, and the students could sort of cluster around them, working on different things. Online, technology can help. We are actually piloting something called Newton Math, which is an adaptive math learning program, so that kids can work at their own pace. When they hit a problem, they can ask the teacher, or the teacher can bring all the students together who are having similar difficulties. There's creative ways to use the same staff.
Workforce,
Yeah. And so.
There you go.
This is really intriguing. I think it's great, and I'm just trying to connect the dots. I'm thinking about the statistics that you listed at the beginning of the presentation, and I am getting the connection with college readiness and changing how kids are ready, prepared with problem solving for college. I'm not getting the connection with dropout rates. Is the premise that lower I like that it's a whole school model. So the lower performing students who would be less motivated to stay are also getting the remediation that would increase dropout rates as part of it?
Well, first of all, we don't really know the efficacy of this. This has never been done before, so I can't, these schools are pioneers. Not only that, they're actually creating this model as they go. We have the idea, you know, remember I mentioned do tank. So we have the idea, we have ideas about how to do this, but you know, in some ways the credit really goes to these schools. And I do want to reemphasize this learning collaborative model, because we meet with all the schools involved in a room like this once a month or by phone, and they're exchanging information. They're saying, well, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? So they're learning from each other. But the reality is we're kind of building the plane as we go based on, you know, some fundamental assumptions. Yes. So on the dropout rate, we don't call this a dropout recovery program, but you know, if you look at the analyses of why students drop out, some of them drop out because they're bored. Some of them just can't stand the thought of just sitting there for 4 years sort of in this. And so the idea is, if you can put more agency into the students, if they can actually affect their destiny by, you know, if you work hard, you can move ahead. Now, some students just don't want to be in high school. You know, we don't, as Barbara said, we don't advocate kids graduating early if they're not ready. It's a family choice. Nobody's getting pushed out of school.
Right.
But if they want to, it's an option. And so when when students have more choices and can see a light at the end of the tunnel. So, but we don't know yet.
So
We don't
when
know.
you talk about with the Cambridge curriculum aligning with kind of upper division AP models, I'm assuming for some of the students that are in the dropout population, that rigor becomes daunting. So does remediation get added to it?
So, so that you could have several types of students. You can have a student that can master this foundational level of college readiness by the end of 10th grade. When that student does that, then they have the quote-unquote upper division options available.
Okay.
But some students might take the full 4 years. So they may never get to the AP level. But what I say to you about that is, if we can get kids even by the end of senior year to this level, and they can, the level is defined as the ability to move on to community college and take the first credit-bearing courses without needing remediation. When we have 50 or 60% of students needing remediation, we've already made a big leap.
Right.
So we're not saying that every student's going to get to the AP level, but we're saying all students we're committed to all students getting that foundational level, which gives them the choices.
And that's part of Cambridge too? The
Well,
foundational
Cambridge,
level?
I should try to clarify a little bit. Cambridge University board exams are used in 160 countries or something. They've been around over 100 years. We're using their instructional delivery model in a move on when ready model. You could have Cambridge in a more traditional system. So this is even new for Cambridge. So I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, let's say you were giving AP to kids. You could say, you take AP, you take your test, and maybe you get a 2. So you don't get college credit. Some student might get college credit. I'm doing a bit of an analogy here, but what we're saying is, not getting the college credit's not good enough. So you need to
Go back.
You need to kind of redo what you didn't get.
Yeah.
But, so we're using Cambridge in this innovative model. It's not inherent in their design, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a phased, move on when ready is kind of a phased model. So you can reach this level of foundational college and qualify to graduate if you want to. But it might take you 2 years, it might take you 4 years. So if you finish it early, then you get the opportunity to go to the more advanced. But the one thing I'd like to point out is all options are still open to all students. Because let's say you go to community college and you don't take those advanced courses in high school, but you go to community college, you are more likely to succeed, because statistics show if you have to take remedial coursework, you're more likely not to finish community college. Especially now in Arizona with the agreements between the community colleges and the universities, these, like you can get accepted into ASU, but do your first 2 years at a community college. If you can succeed in community college, university is still open to you. So it doesn't, we're not closing off options. All options are still open, even if it takes a student 4 years to get to board. You wanted to jump in?
Oh, I was just going to share another example in terms of one of the schools in Yuma. They had some students that still hadn't quite mastered everything they needed to in biology. And so at the end of the academic year, they had a conversation, well, why does biology have to end May 15th? Why could we not extend this course into summer? So those students are still learning and mastering what it is they had not yet done in a defined period of time. So that would be a way. So whereas Cambridge they have estimates in terms of how long a course typically takes to complete, but that isn't written in any sort of rule or regulation anywhere. So the schools are beginning to think about even what a course means and thinking about that differently.
I would love Amanda to share an experience she had at Central High School, because as I mentioned, we have gotten the scores back from these assessments last spring, and so we were very curious how students were going to do. And as I mentioned, we're not particularly surprised that not all students hit those college-ready benchmarks in the very first year. Partly, I would say largely, because they're not coming in prepared. But, so the commitment, of course, is to continue to work with them. We were very, very, I guess anxious could be a correct word. You know, we wanted to make sure students understood that this was not about passing or failing. So not hitting the college ready benchmark didn't mean they had failed. It just meant they were on this journey. So we really worked very hard about how do we communicate this with families. So share what Central did with their family night.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to attend Central's family and student evening where they actually communicated the results to the kids and their families. So they held it from 6 to 7 p.m. in the library, and it was packed. I would say there were at least 80 families and students there. I would say 95% rather spoke Spanish as a primary first language. So the way that they organized it is first they had a brief presentation, and it was translated in Spanish as well, talking about what this initiative really is and how we are clearly defining college and career readiness in terms of what Sybil just said. And then they gave the results to students and asked them to come back and sit down with their families, and they literally had a bar chart for each score, and it showed what the college and career readiness indicator would be. And then they asked students to take highlighters that were available on the table and literally graph the progress that they had made towards college and career readiness. So it changed the conversation from I failed to this is where I am. And then also on the table was a contract that the students could sign with their families saying, I'm going to choose from these 5 different options at different tutoring times, and if I commit to this, then I'm going to be able to retake this exam again and show what progress I've made towards that score. So it really shifted the conversation and was a great opportunity, I think, to increase awareness and understanding about what we mean by college and career readiness, because that term is thrown around all the time, and I think everyone wants that. Schools want that, families want that, kids want that, but what is that? So it made it very real and tangible. And that model actually was shared through the collaborative across all the schools in the state, and then our national partners shared it with schools in Kentucky, Mississippi, and Connecticut. So we were really pleased with the approach that they took in that.
You know, I'll just mention relative to the assessments, one of the things that I guess keeps me up at night in the sense that, you know, these assessments are not cheap. They're not ridiculously expensive, but they're certainly more than the Ames test. So we continually think about how might we work with schools to help them be able to give all their students the assessments. We have a few schools that are whole school to the extent that they can offer the assessments to all the students, and then when Amanda mentioned that they can take them again, so you know, multiple times taking the same test is obviously going to add up. So you know, one thing over time that Amanda and I are going to be thinking about and working on is how can schools, you know, redesign their financial models to be able to support the so in other words, is a lot of initiatives get sort of added on top of everything else that schools do, but if you really need to kind of do a holistic look at your financial model. So that's one thing that we're thinking about. So that's because to be truly whole school, you need to give all students the opportunity to reach that college ready level, and the way you demonstrate it is through these assessments. So we continue to work on thinking about that. The Cambridge board exams, they do always publish previous year's assessments, and while we don't want to, even though they're a nonprofit, we don't want to take too much advantage and just suggest that all the kids take the previous year's exams, but you know, there's different ways that we might work with schools. I should mention on these exams, they are internationally benchmarked. The schools, nor the teachers, they do not grade these. They actually get shipped, believe it or not, I think by boat. Maybe not. Back to the UK, because this is a UK-based system. And they have teams of trained graders who grade the exams that come in from all over the world. And so this is a true internationally benchmarked system that is not subject to being fudged, shall we say. And so we find that very exciting. And on top of it, because it's not high stakes, there's not going to be any kind of pressure to, dumb this down. It is, college ready is what it is. And if a student doesn't hit that benchmark, yes, there's always the fallback that they can graduate from school with their earned credits. But as I said, the commitment is for all students to get to the college ready level. Yes, Marcy?
Yeah, when you were talking about the tests, and I think you and I had this conversation before, but one of the criticisms of standardized tests is that they're culturally skewed, biased, and so the challenge for some demographic groups to score well if the testing, and so I'm wondering about the Cambridge system, and is it, I'm thinking English, even less American, are they culturally uniform? Is that?
Well, I'll ask Amanda if she can give more detail, but for one thing, they offer them in 100-something countries. The entire country of Singapore uses the Cambridge board exam system, and they perform very well. So, in a general sense, they're very aware of these kinds of things. But do you have anything to?
No, just I can support that the examiners who are trained by Cambridge to assess these actually also deliver professional development and to teachers, so they've come to Arizona several times now, so I've had a chance to talk with them about that, and that is something that they do look at. Even in much of this is actual writing of essays. You write across the content areas on these assessments. So they do look at whether or not it might be a vocabulary issue in terms of a term that might not be familiar, and actually take feedback from teachers at the end of each year of assessment around what might have been problematic. So they take it very seriously and do adjust just for that. And for the assessments, and well, not for the assessments, but for the courses that we're using as part of this initiative, they were Americanized only in the sense of some of the vocabulary, not rigor and anything like that, but so that the terms were more familiar.
And I should add a very important feature. These assessments are actually aligned to the curriculum. So this is material that the students would have received. So for the English literature, they're actually tested on the books that they actually read in class, as opposed to Ames, which is just kind of
Generic.
generic, right, exactly.
To Rian's question, just to share what's happening in Yuma, which is a little bit different, just in the sense of the question around remediation. I mean, our funding is actually it's a 5-year grant, and we're going to be focusing on teacher professional development, academic supports for students who might have more challenges. So that is a big piece of it, because it is the entire school district. So we're getting students from every background, every level of academic preparedness, and so we want to make sure, and particularly kind of at the middle school level, and I think we might ultimately kind of drop down into that, because we know it's right now it's 9th and 10th grade Cambridge, and it's very different from what they've seen. So we want to make sure that students, and when I say every student, I think, and I'm not sure if other schools, they may be doing this as well, but they've talked about it, special education students as well. I mean, every student is English language learner, and
English
they're all
language learners,
English language learners, and they're all really engaging in it in a way that, I mean, I think we were not surprised, but I mean, really pleasant. It's been incredible. The teacher reaction, the student reaction has been amazing, but that is a key part of it as well, to make sure that some of that is built in.
I have a question. How expensive is it for those exams?
For the Cambridge exams in the 9th and 10th grade, $50
per assessment per course.
And so it's
That's
about
a negotiated
$250 a
rate.
year.
Yeah.
$250 a year per student.
50 or 15?
$250 per year per student.
Okay, for
Because they have to
all-
take
for
5,
all.
on average, they're taking 5 assessments, right? Yeah, because we're talking about so even the Park assessments, I don't know if all of you are familiar with that, they're only planning to test in math and English and I think eventually science, but we're talking about across
But it's
all,
$50 per
per
FILO,
assessment.
not
Yeah, sorry,
15
yes.
FILO.
Yeah, 5.
Fifty.
Yeah, Ames is 15.
Okay,
Wow.
okay.
Now, if you want to talk about where we could find some money, I've become not a fan of high stakes standardized
I don't
tests.
know if we've mentioned this, but it might just be worth reiterating. The University of Michigan Institute for Social Research is conducting a longitudinal study of all the schools implementing this in Arizona, as well as Kentucky, Mississippi, and Massachusetts. And for anyone familiar with ISR in Michigan, it's first rate. Brian Rowan is leading this and has done a lot of research on comprehensive school reform and innovation models. And so we will have the benefit of this study, and it's being funded through the National Center on Education Economy, as well as some other partners that are helping supplement that. And we're getting access to that data on an annual basis, as are the schools, so that we can continue to refine and enhance the model. And so that will be a very useful tool for us, even in Arizona, to have some statewide conversations about where this goes.
And just to add to that, we're also engaging the University of Michigan with UMA. And so we're not only going to look at the students who do take board exams, we're going to look at the ACT exam as well, because every student, every junior in UMA takes the ACT, and there are going to be other measurement points as well to see what kind of change this, what kind of impact this has on student academic performance in the next couple of years. So there will be lots of different data points, I think.
I have a couple questions. One of them, it kind of sounded like you were talking about something, some students have the choice to participate, and I guess I'm a little unclear about what's the choice?
Yeah, the choice, so in a whole school model like UMA, all students are exposed to the curriculum, so it's the default.
Yeah.
A scientifically statistically valid number of students are taking the assessments as part of the University of Michigan study. The superintendent in UMA has said that she will pay for any other student who wants to take the assessment, but right now they do not have the resources to pay for every student to take the assessment.
And that's a random selection?
The random selection for the study, but then any other student who says to the superintendent essentially that they want to take the assessment is also, I don't know how many step forward beyond the Michigan study, do you know that?
I think it varied by school and some schools.
But in any case, but some schools, for example, in Wickenburg, they're doing ACT Quality Core. All students are taking the assessments there. What other whole school? It's on the sheet. On the back of the sheet, we have whole school. Let me borrow this.
Basis, yeah.
If you see the columns, if you look at the columns, curriculum model and EOC assessment. So curriculum model, down that column, you'll see which schools are doing a whole school with regard to the curriculum. So in other words, is it just basically the default curriculum? And then the EOC assessments, which means end of course assessments, then you'll see which schools are also offering the assessments to every student. So all the basis schools, ASU Prep Academy, Wickenburg, in any case you can, Metro Tech, I guess. So when we say students volunteering, now there's a few schools that are doing this on a more pilot basis to kind of get used to the model before opening it up school-wide. My belief is that they're all committed to the whole school model, and that's certainly what we encourage, both in terms of curriculum and assessments, but we're being realistic that not every school can offer the assessment to every student right now, even though that's our hope.
Are the cohorts self-selected?
I think it varies, yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
students volunteered and said that they wanted to, and there's only a handful of schools that are doing cohort, every time, I should clarify, Rand, cohort curriculum or cohort assessment?
Cohort curriculum.
And we just have a handful of schools that are doing that, and that was open up to students who wanted to participate. A few schools had some kind of an application, but it was still pretty open. It just looked at, are you really committed to this? Do you really want to do this? Writing a personal essay about why you want to be part of it, and a teacher recommendation.
So that could potentially skew the outcomes in those particular cases, but in most of these, it's a whole school curriculum, but as I mentioned, we would very much like to see all kids taking the assessments.
Where does an IB program fit in this?
They would fit in the upper division. So the upper division, I should have mentioned, would include AP, IB, Cambridge. Anything else? The AP, we're really excited. AP, our national partner, negotiated with the College Board to, so that our schools uniquely in the United States can offer the AP diploma program, which is kind of neat.
And with AP, sometimes schools say to us, well, how's this really any different than what we're already doing? We already offer AP, we already offer dual enrollment. And sort of the conversations that we often have is, okay, how many AP courses are you offering? And how many kids are entering those courses at the level of readiness that they need to really be successful? And then that's really where we begin to have a good conversation. We don't yet have that. So schools are beginning to see this truly as a readiness pipeline for any variety of pathways. And what's exciting is that that's where it becomes a student choice. What am I interested in as a student? And what do I want to pursue? But that we honestly are preparing kids to be successful for those pathways. The choice becomes there, that they have the foundational readiness.
I should say one other thing, which is that in our first year, I would say that the schools that wanted to do this were just innovators. In the second year, it's been very interesting. A lot of them have been very attracted to it because we're aligned to the Common Core. They've been grasping around thinking, how the heck are we going to prepare ourselves for the Common Core? And ta-da, here we are. They don't have to recreate the wheel. So we're finding that there's more and more schools who want to get ahead of the curve by participating in this as well.
Because I have a daughter who's a teacher, and I just know that I'm impressed by these teachers who want to take their lunch hour to meet with the students, because most teachers get a half an hour if they're lucky, and this idea of the day extended is pretty amazing.
Well, when you have leaders like Tony Vidone and Yuma, it's actually amazing what can happen. We've been, I would say, I think you used that word, Barbara, kind of pleasantly surprised. It's been amazing what schools are willing to consider doing and doing.
I think and it's about empowerment. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
I remember speaking to a teacher who was a 9th grade teacher who had the opportunity to go back to Florida where her husband was in the military. She wanted to stay because she was able to do things in Yuma that she knew she wouldn't be able to do anywhere else. And so in the collaborative nature, I think they really embraced it for a lot of that reason.
And it's really interesting to me. I think most teachers love to teach AP because it's so much more interesting and fun. And this is like AP on steroids in the sense of everything you teach is that. And when I talk to teachers, it kind of really is striking to me. They are just feel so beaten down by Ames. It is just an awful system for them. And so I think this is such an exciting alternative.
One of the things I can offer at Central that we're dealing with right now, and it has some, things you have to fine tune, but they're co-teaching. And so as in a co-teaching model, then they're taking a lunch, they're separating out their lunch hours and their breaks.
Today.
Yeah, and so so they get that extended day for the student, but they have actually more time to think and prepare. So they do like a curriculum planning, in the morning, they will work that extra couple hours in the beginning of the week in the morning, of a week to get it prepared, but then they, try to get it worked out. But co-teaching's a little tricky too, that's a whole nother.
And this is a great
issue.
example of the kind of thing that could come up in a learning collaborative. So imagine you're all principals or superintendents, and then someone goes, wow, well, we haven't tried that.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the kind of thing that goes on with our schools. And so there's this, or we're trying to, turn some of our courses into online, to be accessible online, and then another school wants to do that, so then they collaborate so that they can reduce the workload. There's this kind of thing going on all the time.
One thing that I think you should talk a little bit about is your role in sort of policy, how you can help. The schools are bumping up against policies that make it very hard to do some things, but you guys play a pretty significant role in that.
Well, our center kind of engages this at multiple levels. So I mentioned the legislation. So, we worked with the legislature, and sort of on the other end of the spectrum is very detailed work with the schools and everything kind of in between. We coordinate with our national partner, we work with Helios, we work with all the schools, we organize these learning collaborative meetings. But on the policy level, what I try to tell the schools is, if you can't do something because of policy, tell us, because we can try to work on that. I'll give you a good example of something that is on my long-term agenda that I raise with whoever I can, which is that the No Child Left Behind law requires that states offer the exact same assessment to every single student in the state. So, in other words, we're facing a situation where our students are taking end-of-course exams for every single course they take, and these are big deal exams. This is not just like a little test. And at the same time, they're required to take AIMS. Now, we're not worried about their passing AIMS if they can pass these assessments, but it's just a lot of tests and it's kind of pointless. But right now, from a policy perspective, we don't have any choice. So that's kind of a big, BHAG type, policy thing that I want to work on. And mostly I've been talking with our national partners about that because they're the ones with the presence in Washington, D.C. They could have more impact on the No Child Left Behind law. And there's all sorts of things like that that we tell our schools, just because it's always been done this way. Or things that I know Amanda's worked on is, the use of funds. Can these funds be used, can Title I funds be used to pay for some of the assessments, right?
Right.
And so we helped clarify that with the Department of Education for the schools and said, yes. And the nice thing is because of this collaborative, then we do the work on behalf of all of the schools, so it's not like a one-on-one thing. So we can announce on one of these calls or in a meeting that Amanda conducts, yes, you can use your Title I dollars to pay for assessments. So those are the kinds of things that we're, the different levels of things that we're often clarifying. Thanks for asking me. Have we exhausted you? So can you see this is different?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you for having me.